Welcome back to Murder in the Black. It is your host, Steph.
And I'm MD.
Let's go ahead and get into our true crime case for today.
So grab your coffee if it's the morning, your lemonade if it's the afternoon, and your wine if it's the evening. But either way, let's get into it.
I'm entitled today's case, Betrayed Brotherhood, the murder of a Marine and his wife. And you know what's so crazy, y'all, is that I keep getting these cases of Marines. And I don't know. I don't really hear a whole lot of cases with the Army. Do you?
No, and I think some of that is because they keep it under wraps.
There you go. That was
Yeah.
what I concluded with my husband today. I was like, this would be so good. I feel like these are top tier, chef kiss. But you're right. I think you're right. Quiana Faye Jenkins was born February 16th, 1982. She was the only child of her mother and father and grew up in Ontario, California. After high school, she attended San Diego State University and received her master's in public health in 2005. She then went on to work for the state as an education assistant program director for the county's Black Infant Care Program and wanted to ultimately become a doctor. Now, Yannick, who was affectionately known as Jan, was born in Poland on March 13th, 1984. He was named after Pope John Paul II, who I believe recently passed.
I believe so.
And when he was about 11 years old, he and his family decided to immigrate to the US, eventually making a home in Brooklyn, New York. After 9/11, he joined the military after the events left an impression on him. And I have to say, I feel like most of 9/11 made an effect on most Americans. But him being an immigrant just goes to show you how patriotic he felt about the country. And he decided that he would enlist into the Army. And he served a tour in Iraq as a pilot and eventually joined the ranks as a sergeant. In 2005, prior to being deployed, he met Kiana at a party for soldiers who were about to be deployed. Now, Kiana's best friend from San Diego State introduced the two. Kiana wasn't initially smitten with the idea of dating a soldier. Now, what do you think about that, MD? Do you think,
I get it because I think dating a soldier, you're going to have this long distance thing going, right?
right?
And also, it's kind of hard to be the main priority in a soldier's life, right? Their main priority is absolutely serving the country and touring and doing and you think about it. This is 9/11. This is still, 2000, in the early 2000s. We were in war. And so it wasn't just being a soldier non-active duty, right? You're
that's a good point.
In war. And so do you want to date somebody that could potentially die? I mean, it's a lot of things that goes to it.
However, after they met, it was love instantly. And when he got back home after being deployed, that's when she kind of let her guards down and really decided that she was going to give this a shot. Because she liked him before, but she was just kind of like on edge about it. And they seemed intensely in love. And on August 8th, 2008, okay, you're not hearing that just by accident, because actually Kiana chose that date so that Jan would remember it. And I'm like, you know what? She did a good job.
2008.
Period. Don't play with her. Kiana was 26 and Jan was 24 when they were married. She actually coordinated her own wedding. It was at a wine vineyard there in California, and all her bridesmaids wore Converses after the wedding was over. I thought that was a really cute touch.
And I did that. I did that.
Oh, you did that? Oh, look at you.
You were in the whole wedding. What is happening?
Yeah. I'm like, yeah, we did that.
It's been several years. It's
I forget. But after they got married and enjoyed their wedding, they moved into their first home. They purchased their first home together in Winchester, California, which was a working class community not too far away from Riverside. They look forward to bringing in their new lives together. They wanted to start having children soon, and they were married just for about 2 months. And I want you to know that Camp Pendleton was very close to where their home was. Although they were in Winchester, it was close to Riverside where Camp Pendleton was because Jan worked there.
Now, on October 15, 2008, they both failed to show up for work. Officers arrived at the home and called for backup when he discovered the door of their home was open. Now, both of their jobs requested a welfare check. And this, I think, I don't know, like I've seen it, so I can't say it's like completely normal, but because I recently I have a friend, Steph, and she's like a supervisor over a team. And one of her employees, like a month ago, was a no call, no show. And they ended up finding out that, he had passed away. Right.
Gosh.
And it was really traumatic. Right. She was telling us about it. And then here this week, she had another no call, no show. And she's like, we're going to send out somebody to do a welfare check on this person to make sure that they're okay. Like we're very concerned we can't get in contact with them. And I think that just depending on, management, the supervisor, the type of person that you are you the type of person that no calls, no shows? Like, I think that it may be pretty typical for your job to actually
Employer.
send for a welfare check. And then I think it probably is very typical for soldiers to do it, right?
Right. I was just about to say, I think for soldiers, that is like, because you can't go AWOL. Where you at? Okay.
Because where are you? Because you have a whole assignment.
Right.
So.
But I think to even you just giving that example of just a normal person, a normal employer, not affiliated with the Army, I think honestly it would be good practices. It's, obviously depending on if you're the type of person to no call, no show. Obviously, we're not dispatching police to your house. But because listen.
Because this is something you're doing all the time.
But I honestly think that probably is a really good practice that maybe companies
should employ.
I'm not for sure.
Absolutely. Well, the door was opened, and upon entering it, it smelled of gasoline. Now, they found a purse that was dumped in the foyer. Lying by the couches, they both had red duct tape around their eyes, ankles, and wrists. It was Kiana and Jan's body. Vibrator and candle were found by Kiana. Jan's body was beaten badly, and Kiana was sexually assaulted. They believe it was multiple assailants that were on the scene. Both were killed by a gunshot wound to the back of their head. The home had been ransacked, and several small fires were attempted on the scene, trying to light the whole scene on fire, but it had failed. And they found 3 shoe print patterns. One impression was a Nike Air Force on a sneaker, and the next pattern was a Nike Cortez. There was other indications that there were multiple assailants, such as, there were several racial slurs that were painted on the walls of the home. They turned the gas on in an attempt to start this fire that they unsuccessfully did, and they tried to use gasoline, which was also unsuccessful. Now, this attack seemed personal, and the racial slurs were on the wall and mirror, and they left it behind for investigators to see. It was like they were intentionally wanting whoever found these bodies to see these racial slurs.
Based on these racial slurs, which I'll tell you guys what they were, but one was nigger lover was one of them. And I believe it was the same sentiment, like the other racial slur. And it was painted on the wall and also spray painted on the wall and also on the mirror. Now, based on this, investigators feel like this is a hate crime, right? And who could have been against this interracial couple? Because we didn't say at the top of the case, but Jan was Caucasian and Kiana was Black. So these racial epithets really made them feel like somebody was angry because they were an interracial couple. So they felt like they needed to speak to the family, and the family just could not identify any known enemies. And I feel like for the most part, that's the case amongst family members when you dig into these true crime cases. But Kiana's mother actually was able to tell investigators one thing that really stuck out to them. She said that she spoke to Kiana the night of the murder, and Kiana and her would often talk on the phone at night. And Kiana mentioned that she was putting the alarm on for the house. So, how did the assailants get in without the alarm triggering? So, After talking to the family, they just really didn't have any further leads on who the suspects were. And as I said previously, they were trying to figure out these racial slurs. Was this a true hate crime, or was this simply people trying to get them to throw them off of the case? But they discovered something. Kiana's ATM card was used at a Washington Mutual Bank right outside of Fallbrook, California. Somebody withdrew $400 and the ATM machine had cameras. But give it up, these cameras worked. But the suspects covered their face. They had on blue bandanas and they also had their hands covered. They had on black gloves with letters on them. And although this may seem like a dead end, like you're like, okay, Steph, come on, this said nothing. It was significant to investigators because it indicated that this particular blank was in close proximity to Camp Pendleton, where Jan worked, which was obviously a military base. So could the suspects be in the military? Okay, you're tracking with me. Yes, they possibly could. The bank was so close to Camp Pendleton, it actually was behind the back gate of Camp Pendleton.
Which is
That's
even
how close
more
it was.
crazy to me that if it was, right? Because it's like you did this on the grounds of military. It's just
Yeah. Like you didn't even take the time to say, you know what, I'm going to go to the bank. But we've already established, criminals just aren't that smart. So they had sufficient evidence to suggest that suspects obviously may be a part of the military. So the police in Riverside had to reach out to the NCIS. Now, the NCIS is known as the Naval Criminal Investigative Services, is the civilian federal law enforcement agency responsible for investigating felony crimes, preventing terrorism, protecting secrets for the United States. Really official. And they operate for the Navy and the Marine. I wanted to give you a quick rundown because sometimes you may not know. So they had to work closely with the NCIS to get access to Camp Pendleton.
They began to interview men in Jan's unit who worked with him and around him and tried to identify, like, was there anybody that he worked with that had any animosity. However, they found out that Jan was described as a disciplined sergeant, which made some upset with his training style. One Marine came forward and mentioned that Tyrone Miller had claimed he hated Jan because of his performance. He would be submitting a bad performance evaluation, therefore resulting in Tyrone not receiving a raise. So could this be a possible motive? Did Tyrone Miller despise Jan enough that he would set out to not only kill him, but to sexually assault his wife and kill his wife? Now, Tyrone Miller made a statement after the murder saying that he felt bad for Kiana. He felt bad that she was dead, but was glad that, Sergeant P, which is what they called him, was dead. They brought Tyrone in because they're like, okay, we got to interview this guy because he's saying some things that may cause some suspicions, some red flags to raise. And they interviewed him and he obliged the detectives. He, in fact, said that, I did like Sergeant P. They asked questions about, where were you during the time of these murders? And one of the questions the investigators asked was if Tyrone would be willing to submit his cell phone records over to the police so that they can identify where he was during the time of the crime. They began to ask him questions about his whereabouts. Where were you during the time of the murders? And in fact, the investigators asked a specific question to Tyrone. They said, listen, if we obtain your cell phone records, which we will those cell phone records put you in the area of the victims? And he said, well, it shouldn't. Which is not an affirmative answer. I mean, either you were or you weren't. Either these cell phone records are going to place you here or they're not going to place you here. There is no in between. This is not a gray area here, folks. Which that's not what detectives were looking for. So, their suspicions of Tyrone continued. Now, Tyrone described that he was wearing on the night of the murders, and he indicated that he was wearing Air Force Ones. Now, these shoes were found on, remember, we found some shoe prints on the scene of the crime, and they felt that he somehow had to be involved in this murder, but they couldn't definitively place him there yet.
Yeah. And I think for detectives, what I've noticed, and I'm curious to know for you guys who are avid true crime listeners to our podcast, but to others, you start to see that there is a routine, right? And for detectives, I think it's not one thing for detectives that make a suspect stick out. It's multiple things. It was the fact that he had the Air Force Ones. It was the fact that he could not say, oh yeah, for sure I'm not in that area, right? Like, God. It was the fact that he made these inflammatory statements about Sergeant P, like to other people. It's not just one thing. It's the devil's always in the details. They believe they had enough probable cause to get a search warrant. On October 29th, 2008, they searched his home on the base. Now, they came into his home with guns drawn. And as the police entered the home, Tyrone picked up his toddler and used his child as a shield. Now, if you wondered if Tyrone is guilty, I'm just.
Okay. If that doesn't scream GUILTY, I don't know what does.
Right. Now, their guns, as I said, were drawn, but eventually he puts down his child.
Thank God.
And they were able to collect evidence without incident. They found Jan's address on a piece of paper which was concealed in the couch, like it was stuffed down in the couch. And then they found an array of weapons. Some were stolen, some didn't even belong to him. They also found Kiana's ATM card in the open on the drawer. And they also found jewelry belonging to both Jan and Kiana. They found the gloves that were seen on the ATM camera. See, that ATM camera came in clutch. And the bandana was also found on scene. They also found the suspended casings of the gun that was used with blood on it. He hadn't even cleaned that. Yeah. They found all the evidence that they could need. Faced with all the overwhelming evidence, they approached Tyrone, and he admits that, yes, he and some other Marines, in which we'll get into their names in a second, were at Jan's home on the night of the murder. However, he didn't kill anyone. Can y'all just cue these violins? Like, I just want to hear the violins just play. You know what I mean? He claims he didn't kill anybody, but when they arrived at Jan's home, he simply just taped him and Kiana up. He taped them up, and he just claimed that he wanted to beat up Jan because Jan was about to give him a bad performance review. And it's my understanding, all of you guys who may be in the military, I'm anxious to hear about these performance reviews because actually, MD, before Jan was killed, he had a stellar performance review and got a $30,000 bonus. Obviously, these performance reviews
they matter. I mean, well, they matter in corporate America as well, right? Like, right. They are, especially when you work for a company that gives you bonuses at the end of the year, which is usually based in part on your personal evaluation and how well the company did, right? Like, right. So your evaluation, maybe your team's evaluation, and how well the company performed as a whole. And so, I mean, I can totally see how that could be something that,
you'll be upset about. Yeah, for sure.
But upset enough to kill?
Or even upset enough to do what Tyrone's alleging he did, which was to simply go over and beat him up. That's a bit much. But this is what he said. He said, listen, I came over there just to beat him up. That's all I wanted to do. But the Marines I was with, they were the ones that wanted to sexually assault Kiana. And they wanted to get Jan back. And they wanted him to suffer. And it was one of the other Marines named Emmers John, who was a fellow Marine and started off in Jan's unit, but eventually was moved. He claimed that it was Emmers who decided that he wanted to pull the trigger because although they were maxed up, he felt like, oh, well, surely Jan will be able to identify our voices. We've literally been training with him. He's our sergeant. He's gonna know who we are. And it was Emerson John who gave the kill shot and the order to kill both Jan and Kiana.
They conduct a search on Emerson John and his barracks, and they find his cell phone. And as they're searching through his cell phone, they find conversation or communications with a guy whose nickname in the cell phone was Psycho. They don't know who this guy is, but they run his number through the NCIS analysis, and they identify Psycho, right, as Keyshawn Sykes. And they conduct a search and find more of Kiana's jewelry with Keyshawn Sykes. The other Marine identified was Kevin Darnell Cox. Now, this wasn't the first time the group had committed a crime together, which can we just let that sit there? Because if we're committing crimes together, how are we still in the military?
They were getting away with it.
Apparently. Now, they linked other evidence through robberies around the city. They had weapons, juries, and IDs. They were terrorizing the community. On November 3rd, 2008, they arrested all four individuals, Tyrone Miller, Kevin Cox, Emerson John, and Keyshawn Sykes, and they were all charged with capital murder. On August 12, 2009, in Riverside County, they tried all the men for murder. And Tyrone Miller, Kevin Cox, and Keyshawn Sykes, they admitted to not guilty pleas.
The trial of the four defendants was halted on February 1st, 2011, after Keyshawn Sykes urinated during a court hearing. Following this incident, the judge ordered a psychological evaluation for Keyshawn, and it was ultimately decided that he was fit to stand trial. So it didn't work, Keyshawn.
It didn't work, sir.
Sorry.
So sorry.
This prompted the judge to resume criminal proceedings for Sykes and his co-defendants. Three defendants, Kevin Darnell Cox, who was 25 years old, Emerson John, who was 23, and Tyrone Miller, who was 25, went on trial for the murder and related charges starting on Monday, April 8th, 2013, at 9 a.m. in Riverside Hall of Justice. Due to courtroom space limitations, Cox was tried by one jury, while John and Miller were tried separately for similar reasons. On June 5th, 2013, Cox and John were convicted of 2 counts of first-degree murder, and Miller was convicted of sexual penetration with a foreign object, along with 2 counts of first-degree murder. On June 20th, 2013, juries handed down verdicts sentencing Tyrone Miller, Emerson John to death, while Cox received life imprisonment without the possibility of parole. Keyshawn Sykes was later sentenced to death on November 7, 2014, and Miller was officially sentenced to death on July 19, 2013. Cox expressed no remorse, stating he would appeal, while John, identified as the gunman, was given the death penalty. Judge Christian Thurbach described the murders as savage and the most inhumane he had encountered in his 27 years on the bench, which I think says a lot, because that means Absolutely. You've seen a lot come through your court. Now, it was determined that although Miller tried to detract investigators from the beginning, as I told you, he said that he had nothing to do with it. It wasn't him. He just was going there to beat up Jan. It was the others, especially Emerson John. Ultimately, he was the initiator of the crime, according to his co-defendants. They said it was him who wanted them to go to the house that day. It was him who wanted to rape Kiana. It was him who ultimately decided to render the kill shots to both Jan and Kiana. Also, just to talk about Cox for a second, Cox, he was the one who didn't plead not guilty. So he went before the court, said, I'm guilty, but I was not involved in the actual murder. I did not ever enter Jan's home that night. I was the person who was outside of the home in the car. I was basically the getaway driver. I was the person who was the lookout person. And to that point, the prosecutors noted, they were saying inside of the documentary I watched and also in some articles that you're still guilty. You didn't call the police. You didn't render help. You didn't try to stop it. And by that, you are guilty. Rolling into our takeaway, I think that's so important to remember. You naturally want to ascribe this lesson to young people, people who are young in their young adulthood or teenagers who want to say, you could still be guilty. But I think that's true for all of us. When you see something that isn't right, you have a duty and an obligation, whether it be crime or not. You have a duty and an obligation to speak up. Because this particular crime, I don't have a centralized takeaway as I do in other cases. This is just my thoughts. But I think we have to keep in mind that we have a duty to speak out when we see wrong. And I think in this case, more than anything, although what happened to Kiana and Jan was so unfortunate, I think it shows that these particular perpetrators had a history of crime. They were already criminals before this started. This was not just a crime of opportunity. They were already committing crime and getting away with it. That emboldened them to do what they did because they thought by putting up those racial slurs that it was going to detract police officers. And they're not that smart because obviously they thought, putting gasoline and starting the gas was going to start a fire. They thought they were going to get away with it. I mean, to be honest, and I think your choices always catch up with you. It always comes out in the wash. It always comes out. And I hate that this happened to Jan's family and Kiana's family. So rest in peace to both of them and their dreams and aspirations. They were just married for 2 months when all of this happened.
Legally, Steph, I do want to just say that, that is, can you be a part of a crime, not be the main participant like Cox, and say, well, it wasn't me. He admits, I'm guilty. I was there, but I wasn't there. I wasn't there, right? And the only way to be able to get out of that, I remember learning a case in law school where it was you had no idea you were in the car, right? You didn't know that y'all were driving to this robbery. Nobody told you. You get there, they go in and they rob the bank, and you were just there. How do you get out of that, right? You really didn't know. And it just is so unfortunate, right? This is why it's so important to know who you're hanging with, to know to make better, make wise choices, make sure you're not hanging with folks that's going to do something crazy. But yeah, the only way to get out of that kind of a situation that Cox was in is that he would not only have to flee, right? So you have to actively leave, and then you have to actively try to prevent or stop or notify, right? So then then he can cut off his liability, so to speak, to the crime.
That makes sense. And I think maybe, for those of you who may not know, because I don't think that was the case for him for sure. That's a possibility. That's good to just know. So some news you can use. Make sure you share and like this case with others that you know are true crime sleuths or who would just enjoy this true crime case. We want to encourage you guys continuously to join us over on YouTube, where we are trying to get bigger and better for you guys just to enhance your experience. And until next time, this is Murder in the Black. Thank you.